Assalamu alaikum. Today, inshallah, we are going to study a new topic in our macroeconomics course, and very important topic. It's about inflation. We'll learn the classical theory of inflation. We'll see the causes of inflation, the effects, and the social costs. When we say the classical theory, we assume that prices are flexible and markets are clear. So in this chapter, we'll learn about the long run trend, behavior of the prices, and the inflation. In the next chapters, inshallah, we will see the short run trend. As we can see from this chart, the US inflation and its trend in the 60s till the 2006. We can see the short run or the percent change in the CPI from 2 months earlier. We can see many fluctuations and ups and downs and so on. But in the long run trend, you can see it's more smooth and flexible. So the connection between money and the prices at the beginning, you can see the inflation rate, as we know that the percentage increase in the average level of prices. So if the inflation is the increase in prices, the inflation rate is the percent change or the percent increase in the average level of the prices. As we know, price, the amount of money required to buy something or buy a good or a product or any service. So prices as the amount of money required to buy these goods. Because prices are defined in terms of money, we need to consider the nature of money and the supply of money and how it is controlled, as we saw in the previous chapter. We define money and what is the supply of money and the role of the central banks and the other banks in the monetary system and so on, and how the amount of money or the money supply is controlled or determined and so on. So according to this, according to what we studied in the previous chapter, we will see now the relation and the quantity theory of money. The quantity of money available in the economy, as we said in the previous chapter, is called the money supply. It is determined by the banking system and the policy decisions of the central bank. So, to examine the macroeconomic effects of the monetary policy, we need a theory that tells us how the quantity of money is related to other economic variables such as the prices and the incomes and so on. So, this is called the quantity theory of money. A simple theory. This theory is very simple, linking the inflation rate to the growth rate of the money supply, and how much the growth rate of the money supply, how much the increase in the money supply will also increase the inflation rate or the average, the increasing average level of prices. So this theory have many variables. We'll talk about them now, but let's talk about the concept of the velocity. Maybe it's a new one. So the basic concept of velocity, the rate at which money circulates, the rate at which money circulates. We will define it as the number of times the average dollar bill, the paper of dollars, the currency, the banknote. This is called the dollar bill. The average time, the number of times, how many times this dollar changes hands, goes from hand to hand in a given period of time. Yani let's say in a year. For example, مثلا in 2007, there is $5 billion transactions in the transactions in an economy. There is $5 billion buying and selling and so on. But the money supply in this economy is only $100 billion. So the available money in the economy is $100, and the individuals in the economy make transactions by the amount of $500 billion. So what is the velocity in this case? The average dollar is used in 5 transactions in this year, so the velocity is 5. So you can simply see according to the money, the amount of money supply and how much the transactions. So we can get the number of times this average dollar changes hands in a given period of time. This suggests the following definition. The velocity equals the transactions. The V is for velocity, T for the value of all the transactions in an economy, and M is the money supply. So when we divide the transactions, 500 divided by the money supply, which is 100, so the velocity of the number of times the currencies are changes hands in the economy, it will be 5 times. This is the amount of velocity. Okay, now we are using the term or the word T for transactions, but it's very difficult to measure in this theory, the quantity theory of money. It is difficult to measure the all the amount of transactions. So using the nominal GDP as a proxy for the total transactions. Then we will substitute the T for transactions by the nominal GDP, which is the price multiplied by the output. So price is P is for price of output, the GDP according to the GDP deflator. Y is the quantity of the output, the real GDP. So if we multiply the quantity of the output by the price of the output, now we will get the nominal GDP. So the P multiplied by Y is the value of the output, the quantity of output multiplied by the price of this output. This is called the nominal GDP or the value of the output. Then we divide this value by the money supply available in the economy. We will find the velocity. So let's go to the quantity equations. Now we know all the variables in these equations. The quantity equations is the money supply multiplied by the velocity, M multiplied by V, equals the, as we see now, the nominal GDP or price multiplied by the output or the quantity of the output. So it is called an identity. It holds by definition of these variables. This amount at the right hand is equal to the left hand. That's why we call this equation an identity. So we can see from this photo, money supply is the amount of money available in the economy. Velocity is how many times this money circulated in the economy. Price is the price of all the outputs in the economy, and the Y is the quantity of the outputs. How many houses, how many cars, how many breeds, and so on. In the short run, I know we are talking about the long run now, but let's see this. In the short run, when the money supply increases, that's why may the government or the central bank increases the money supply in some cases, because in the short run it may be effective because it increases the output. When the money supply increase in the short run, like مثلا for example in prices like we are living now, maybe the central bank may increase the money supply or decrease the interest rate and so on. So there is a lot of actions to increase the transactions and the buying and selling and the output and the GDP of the country, and the growth rate will not be full. So in our topic now, we are talking about the long run. So when the money supply increases, the prices will increase in the long run. because you have to buy. There's many currencies, a lot of money, so you will buy the same product with more money at the future. So in the long run, it increases the prices, and when the money supply increased rapidly, it will increase the prices more rapidly and make what we call the hyperinflation. We will see at the end of the chapter. So the money demand, now we know the quantity equation and its variables. What about the money demand and the quantity equation? You know, the real money balances, which is when you know the purchasing power of the money supply. This money, how can you value the value of this money by how much this money can purchase. So this is called the real money balances, the purchasing power of the money supply. Okay, so a simple money demand function, as we see here, where K in this equation, the demand function, how much money people wish to hold for each dollar for income. How much money people wish to hold for each dollar of income. So as we see here, the money demand equation and the quantity equation. So the connection between them will be that K, as K is the opposite of the V. K is opposite of V, velocity. So K here equals 1 divided by velocity. So when people hold lots of money relative to their income, so in this case K will be high. So when K is high, the money changes hands very slowly, infrequently. So V will be low. And the opposite, when K, or when people hold less money relative to their income, so in this case K will be low. So the money changes hands frequently and more fast. So the velocity will be higher. So let's go back to the quantity theory of money. Starts with the quantity equation, assuming that V, velocity, is constant and exogenous. So with this assumption, the quantity equation can be written as this. The M, or money supply, divided the constant velocity, will equal the price multiplied by the output, the quantity of output. So how the price level is determined in this case when the velocity is constant. So with V is constant, the money supply, we only have now the money supply. It will determine the nominal GDP, the price of output multiplied by the quantity of the output. So the real GDP, Y, is determined, as we know, by the economic supplies like the capital and the labor and the production function, as we see in chapter 3. This is Y. And velocity is constant. So now we have what? M, the money supply, and prices. The price level, in this case, is the nominal GDP divided by the real GDP, as we see in the GDP deflator. So recall from chapter 2, the growth rate of a product equals the sum of the growth rates. The growth rate of a product equals the sum of the growth rates. Or the quantity equation in the growth rates, the quantity equation in growth rates will be like, as we see now, the change in the money supply plus the change in velocity, but now the velocity is constant, so it will be 0, there's no change, and will equal the change in prices plus the change in the quantity of the output. So as we can see, the Greek letter pi denotes for the inflation rate. We know that the inflation rate is the percent change of prices. And the result from the preceding slides was that the change in the money supply, now we omitted a velocity. Now we only have in the left hand the money supply. So the change in money supply equals the change in price plus the change of the quantity of the output. So when we get the change in price level to the left hand and get the change in the money supply in the right hand to solve this result for the inflation rate, to get that the inflation rate will equals the change in the money supply minus the change in the quantity of output, as we can see. So the normal economic growth requires a certain amount of money supply growth to facilitate the growth in the transactions. This is the normal economic growth. It requires what? A certain amount of money supply, not too much money supply or decreasing money supply. No, certain amount to facilitate the growth in transactions, only enough for buying and selling and so on, not like other governments do in like Zimbabwe or many other countries. We will see this at the end of the topic. So the money growth in excess of this amount leads to inflation. When the money growth in the economy exceeds, as we see in this equation, this leads to inflation according to this function. As we know, the change in the output depends on the growth in the factors of production and on the technological process. Hence, the quantity theory predicts a one-for-one relation between changes in the money growth rate and the changes in the inflation rate. We can now confront the quantity theory with the data. The quantity theory of money implies that countries with higher money growth rates should have higher inflation rates. Yes, and also the long-run trend behavior of countries' inflation should be similar to the long-run trend in the country's money growth rate. Are these data consistent with these implications and at the real economies and so on? We can see this in reality. We can see in international data on inflation and money growth, the relation between the inflation rate in the vertical axis and the money supply growth, the amount of money supply in the horizontal axis. In many different countries, we can see the perfect linear relationship and positive relationship between the growth of the money supply and the increase in the inflation rate. Also, during time, different years, it is the same, the growth rate, and over the long run, the inflation and the money growth rates move together, as we can see as the quantity theory predicts. Okay, this is what is the quantity theory and how we can predict that the inflation rate is affected by the growth rate of the money supply and the increasing or decreasing of the money supply and the amount of money in the economy and so on. Now we will move to the next topic and we'll end the lesson about this concept of senior age. Senior age means the revenue from printing money. Why governments may print money to spend more without raising taxes or selling bonds. The government can print. We know that the main sources for governments to spend money, it may take taxes, levy taxes, or buy debt or selling bonds to the public, or they can print money. So they can raise tax or borrow money from selling bonds, or they can print money. So the revenue raised from the printing money, this is called senior age. The revenue for the government raised by printing money. It's called also the inflation tax, as printing money to raise revenue causes inflation. So the inflation is like a tax on people who hold money. That's why sometimes it's called the inflation tax, as we know that printing more money, increasing the money supply, this makes or causes inflation. So people who hold money with them will be less valuable in the future. So this is like a tax on those people who hold money and don't spend money in transactions and so on. Okay, let's stop here. Next lesson, inshallah, we are going to start with we will continue and see the inflation, the relation between the inflation and the interest rate and so on. So next you see you next lesson, inshallah. Goodbye and good luck.